My son-in-law came into my garage on a Tuesday afternoon without knocking. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Not what he said. Not the look on his face. Just the fact that he walked past my truck, past the shelving unit I'd built myself 30 years ago, and stood there like he owned the place. Like he was already taking inventory. I let him talk. I kept my hands on the workbench and I let him talk. I kept my hands on the workbench and I let him talk. I should back up. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm 67 years old. I live in Sudbury, Ontario. I have one daughter, and I spent 31 years building a business that most people in my neighborhood didn't even know existed. My daughter's name is Fiona. She's 34 now. Smart, kind, the kind of person who remembers your coffee order after meeting you once. Her mother, my late wife Sandra, used to say Fiona got all the best parts of both of us, and none of the worst. I believed that then. I still believe it now. Fiona met her husband at a work conference in Toronto. His name is Liam. He works in something he describes as financial consulting, which as far as I can tell means he advises small business owners on how to spend money they don't have. He's 38, he drives a leased BMW, and he uses the word leverage, the way other people use punctuation. They dated for 2 years. Got engaged. Got married last September at a vineyard outside of Niagara-on-the-Lake. It was a beautiful wedding. I walked Fiona down the aisle. I cried. She laughed at me for crying. I paid for the whole thing, and I was glad to do it. At the reception, Liam shook my hand and told me I'd raised an incredible woman. He said it the way you'd compliment someone's car. I smiled. I thanked him. I did not tell him anything about my business. That was a decision I'd made 6 months before the wedding, and it turned out to be the most important decision I've ever made. Let me tell you what the business is, because it matters. In 1991, I started a small property management company. Nothing glamorous. I handled maintenance contracts for landlords who didn't want to deal with their own tenants, coordinating repairs, scheduling tradespeople, managing the day-to-day headaches of rental units. I had a truck, a phone, and about 14 clients. By 2003, I had 42 clients and a small office on Elm Street. By 2015, the company managed over 200 residential units across Sudbury and Greater Sudbury, plus a handful of commercial leases. I had 8 employees, 2 part-time coordinators, and a reputation in the city that I'd built by showing up when I said I would and doing what I said I'd do. When Sandra got sick in 2018, I stepped back. I promoted my operations manager, a woman named Diane, who'd been with me for 12 years, to run the day-to-day. I spent 2 years taking Sandra to appointments, sitting with her, driving her to her sister's place in Sault Ste. Marie when she wanted to see the lake. Sandra died in March 2020. I don't talk about that much. There isn't much to say that wouldn't sound small. After she died, I put the business into a family trust. My lawyer, a man I've known since we coached hockey together in the 90s, helped me structure it properly. The trust holds the company's shares, the equipment, the contracts, and a small commercial property I'd purchased in 2009 that now houses 3 long-term tenants. I am the trustee. Fiona is the sole beneficiary, but only under specific conditions, at age 40, or in the event of my death, whichever comes first. Until then, the trust is mine to manage and no one else can touch it. I did this because Sandra asked me to. She said, "Don't let someone you don't know yet make decisions about what we built." She wasn't talking about anyone specific. She was just being careful. Sandra was always careful. I told Fiona the trust existed. I told her she would be taken care of. I did not tell her the details, the structure, the conditions, the valuation. She didn't ask. Fiona has never been interested in money the way some people are. She just wanted to know I was okay. I did not tell Liam anything. Not at the engagement dinner. Not at the Christmas. Not at the wedding. When he asked what I did, I told him I used to run a property management business, and I was semi-retired. Which was true. I let him draw his own conclusions about what semi-retired meant for a man in a modest bungalow in Sudbury. He concluded it meant I was comfortable but not particularly significant. That conclusion suited me fine. The first sign came about 6 weeks after the wedding. Fiona called me on a Sunday, She and Liam had settled into their condo in Toronto by then, and she mentioned, almost in passing, that Liam had been asking her about the business. "What kind of asking?" I said. "Just curious stuff, Dad, like what it was worth, whether you ever thought about selling." I asked her what she told him. She said she didn't really know the details, which was true, and that she'd told him it was my business and not really her place to discuss. Good girl, I thought. I didn't say that out loud. I said, "Tell him it's complicated and I'm not looking to make any changes." She said she would. We talked about other things. I made a note in my head to pay attention. 3 weeks later, Liam called me directly. That was new. We'd never had a phone call, just the two of us. He was friendly, easy, asked how I was doing. Mentioned he'd been thinking about Sudbury and how the rental market up north was apparently getting interesting. I listened. I gave him nothing. At the end of the call, he said, almost as an aside, "If you ever wanted a second set of eyes on the books, I'd be happy to help." That's kind of what I do. I thanked him. I said I'd keep that in mind. I hung up and sat with my coffee for a while. This was the moment I understood what was coming. It built slowly over the winter. A comment at Christmas dinner about how property management businesses were often undervalued and how the right sale at the right time could set everyone up. A question, framed as casual, about whether I had a succession plan. A mention, twice, of a colleague of his who specialized in small business acquisitions. Fiona didn't notice the pattern because she wasn't looking for it. She's not suspicious by nature. She loves Liam, and she trusted that his interest in my business was just him being interested in her family. I noticed every single word. I didn't say anything to Fiona. I didn't want to put her in the middle. Sandra used to say that the worst thing you can do in a family conflict is make your child the messenger. I think that's right, so I watched, and I kept my mouth shut, and I waited to see where this was going. By February, I had a pretty clear picture. Liam believed the business was worth considerably more than I'd ever let on. He believed it was sitting there, loosely structured, and that with the right conversation, the right pressure maybe, applied gently to the right person, he might be able to get Fiona to push for a sale. He thought I was a 67-year-old widower with no particular plan, and that a smart, motivated man in financial consulting could help me see the wisdom of cashing out. What he did not know, what no one had told him, was that the business was held in an irrevocable family trust, structured under Ontario law, with conditions that made it completely inaccessible to anyone but me until specific events occurred. He could not pressure Fiona into anything, because Fiona had no legal standing to make decisions about the trust. I had made absolutely certain of that. He was pushing on a door that was bolted from the inside. The Tuesday he walked into my garage was a Saturday in March. I'm sorry, it was a Saturday. I said Tuesday earlier. I've been telling this story for months, and sometimes the details shift. It was a Saturday in March, cold still, one of those Sudbury late winter days where the sky is the same gray as the slush on the road. He and Fiona had driven up for the weekend. That part was normal. What was not normal was that on Saturday afternoon, Fiona went to visit her aunt on the other side of the city, her mother's sister, Pauline, who she visits every few months, and Liam stayed behind. He came into the garage about 20 minutes after Fiona left. I was restoring an old tool chest that had belonged to my father. I heard the side door open. I heard footsteps. I did not turn around. "Hey, Norm," he said. "My name is Norman, but I haven't gone by anything except Norm since I was 12 years old." I said, "Hey." I kept working. He picked up a socket wrench from the shelf and looked at it like he was considering whether it was worth anything. Then he put it down. Then he said, "I've been meaning to have a real conversation with you." I put down what I was holding. I turned around. I leaned against the workbench and I crossed my arms and I said, "Okay." He took that as an invitation, which I suppose it was. He told me he'd been doing some research. He said he'd looked into property management companies of similar size in northern Ontario, and he'd seen some recent sales that he found pretty eye-opening. He said a business like mine, and here he paused, because he still didn't actually know what my business was worth. Could probably move for somewhere between 800,000 and 1.2 million, depending on the contract base and asset situation. I let him finish. Then I said, "What's your point, Liam?" He smiled. He said he wasn't trying to be pushy. He just thought it might be worth having a conversation about what my plans were. He said he had relationships with buyers who were actively looking at the Sudbury market. He said Fiona worried about me, and that maybe having some liquidity would let me relax, travel, enjoy the next chapter. He said the next chapter, like I was a book he was trying to close. I said, "I appreciate you thinking about it." He took that as encouragement. He said he'd been talking to a colleague who'd done 2 similar acquisitions in the past year, and if I was open to it, maybe we could sit down with some of the financials just to get a sense of the landscape. I said, "Which financials?" He said, "Well, the operating statements, the contract list, maybe the property valuation if you have one." I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, "Liam, what do you know about how the business is held?" He paused. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Ownership structure. Do you know how it's structured?" He said he assumed it was just my company. A sole proprietorship or a numbered corporation. Something like that. I said, "It's in a family trust. Irrevocable. Set up in 2020. I'm the trustee. Fiona becomes beneficiary at 40, or at my death, under conditions I set at the time of establishing it." The expression on his face changed, not dramatically. He's good at composure. But something behind the eyes shifted and I saw it. He said, "Oh, I didn't realize." I said, "Most people don't." There was a pause. Outside, a truck went by on the road. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking. He said, "So that means," I said, "it means I cannot sell the business. The trust doesn't allow for voluntary sale by the trustee, except under conditions that aren't present right now. It also means Fiona has no authority to request or negotiate anything on the company's behalf. It also means that any proceeds from any future transaction, if one ever occurred, would go into the trust and be distributed according to the trust terms. Not to me, not to my estate in the normal sense, to the trust." I watched him process this. I said, "My lawyer set it up that way specifically. We wanted to make sure the asset was protected." He said, "Protected from what?" I said, "From situations where someone might want to move quickly on something before fully understanding what they were dealing with." I did not raise my voice. I did not smile. I just held his eyes and let him understand what I meant. His face went through several things in quick succession. I recognized all of them. I've been in enough negotiations over 30 years to know what it looks like when a man realizes his position is weaker than he thought. He said, "Right, yeah, no, that makes sense." I said, "I'm glad we talked about it." He said, "Yeah, me too." He left the garage 10 minutes later. I heard his footsteps going back across the driveway. I heard the back door of the house open and close. I picked up the socket wrench he'd handled and put it back in its exact spot. Then I went back to the tool chest. Fiona came back from her aunt's around 5. We had dinner together, the 3 of us. Liam was quieter than usual. He helped clear the plates without being asked. He asked me questions about the tool chest, where my father had gotten it, whether I planned to refinish it or just clean it up. Normal questions. Safe questions. I answered all of them. After dinner, Fiona and I did the dishes while Liam watched the game in the living room. She asked me if everything was okay, the way she sometimes does. She has her mother's radar for emotional weather. I said everything was fine. She said, "You seem like you're thinking about something." I said, "I'm always thinking about something." She laughed. She handed me a pot to dry. We stood at the sink the way we used to when she was a teenager, and I'd make her help clean up after dinner even when she protested. I thought about Sandra. I thought about how she would have handled this. She would have been more gracious than me, I think. She would have found a way to make Liam feel like he'd learned something useful, rather than like he'd been quietly walked into a corner. I'm not as gracious as Sandra. but I get the same results by different means. They drove back to Toronto the next morning. Liam shook my hand at the door. He told me it was good to see me. His grip was normal. His face was normal. Whatever he was feeling, he decided to keep below the surface, which I respected, frankly. There's a kind of dignity in knowing when you've been outmaneuvered and not making a scene about it. Fiona hugged me for a long time at the door. She smelled like her mother's shampoo. She'd been using the same brand since university. She bought it herself after Sandra died. I don't think she even knows I noticed. I held on a few seconds longer than usual. I watched them pull out of the driveway. I watched the car go down the street and turn left at the corner toward the highway south. Then I went inside. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table where Sandra and I used to sit on Sunday mornings with the paper, even after everything went digital. We still got the actual paper. She liked the feel of it. I sat there for a while. I want to be clear about one thing. I don't think my son-in-law is a bad person. I think he's an ambitious person who looked at a situation and calculated that there was an opportunity. I think he genuinely believes that what he was doing was reasonable. Finding value, making things efficient, helping his family get ahead. I don't think he stopped to consider that the thing he was trying to move was something another person had spent 30 years building, had built with their wife, had restructured and protected after that wife died so that it would still mean something. I don't think he thought about that part. A lot of people don't. What I do think, what I have spent a lot of quiet evenings in this house thinking about, is whether I handled it right. My daughter loves her husband. That is a fact I have to live with and respect. Whatever Liam is, Fiona chose him, and she's not someone who chooses carelessly. Maybe he learns. Maybe the conversation in the garage was exactly what needed to happen. A limit being set, clearly, without drama, in a language he understood, a wall being shown for what it is before he put his hands on it. Sandra would say, "Give it time." I'm trying to give it time. What I know is this: the trust stands. Diane still runs the operation and runs it well. The 3 commercial tenants on Brady Street are into their second long-term lease renewals. We picked up 4 new residential management contracts in January. The business I built is doing fine without anyone's help, and it will continue to do fine, and when Fiona turns 40, she will receive something real and whole and untouched. That was the plan. That was always the plan. I made it the day Sandra asked me to be careful, lying in a hospital bed in Health Sciences North with her eyes half closed and her hand in mine, telling me to protect what we'd built. I said I would. I kept that promise. That's the whole story, I think. Or at least the part that's finished. The rest of it. Fiona and Liam, what they build together, whether he becomes someone I trust the way Sandra would have wanted me to eventually trust him, that part is still going. I watch. I wait. I keep my mouth shut when it matters. Old habits. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, turning it over the way you turn over a piece of wood before you decide how to cut it. Trying to figure out what it actually means, not what happened. I know what happened, but what it says about the way things work when you pay close enough attention. Here's what I keep coming back to. Liam didn't walk into my garage because he was a bad person. He walked in because he thought the situation rewarded that kind of move. He'd looked at me, a widower in a modest house in Sudbury, semi-retired, quiet, and he'd calculated that the door was open. That's not evil. That's just someone reading a room wrong because they only looked at the surface. The thing about building something over 30 years is that you learn the difference between what something looks like and what it actually is. A rental property on a beat-up street can generate more reliable income than a glass and steel office tower. A man who doesn't talk much at dinner might have made more decisions before you arrived than you'll make in your entire career. I wasn't hiding. I was just living at a level of detail Liam hadn't thought to look for. Sandra used to say that patience isn't passive. It took me years to really understand that. I always thought patience meant waiting, sitting still while things happen around you. But what she meant was that patience is its own kind of action. Every day I didn't overreact. Every conversation I let pass without correcting someone's assumptions about me. Every time I smiled and said nothing. That was work. Deliberate, effortful, purposeful work. The trust didn't protect itself. I built it. I maintained it. I kept my mouth shut about it for years. That's not luck. That's a long series of quiet decisions made in the right direction. What I want people to take from this, if they take anything, is that integrity isn't a personality trait. It's a practice. Sandra and I didn't build what we built because we were naturally good people. We built it because we made choices, over and over, about what mattered and what didn't. We chose the business over easy shortcuts. We chose to protect Fiona's future even when it would have been simpler not to. We chose to structure things properly even when it cost money and time we didn't feel like spending. None of that felt heroic in the moment. It just felt like the right thing to do, repeated enough times that it became a foundation. Liam will figure things out. I genuinely believe that ambition isn't the problem. Ambition without wisdom is the problem. And wisdom is mostly just experience you've decided to learn from. He's 38. There's time. And Fiona, my daughter, who has her mother's instincts and her mother's patience, she'll be fine. She's already fine. She doesn't need me to fight her battles. She never did. She just needed me to make sure that when the time came, there was something real waiting for her. Something that couldn't be leveraged or rushed or talked out from under her by someone with a good handshake and the right vocabulary. That's what I gave her. Not wealth, exactly. Stability. The kind that takes decades to build and can't be moved in an afternoon. I think that's enough. I think Sandra would say that's enough.